Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pick and Mix Leadership Launchpads podcast. And I am chuffed to have with us Deb Outhwaite, who will tell you a bit about who she is in a moment. But she's a perfect example of why this podcast exists, really, because we've met. I know a bit about her. I've been impressed with everything I've ever seen from her or talked to her about. But I know very, very little about her story up to the point when we met. And so welcome, Deb.
Thanks, Chris.
And I guess we'll start with, I guess we'll start with the obvious question of tell us a bit about what you do now, and then afterwards take us back a few steps.
Okay, so I am currently running an online MA education at the University of Liverpool, and at the University of Liverpool since 2017. So I've had a part-time role there since 2017. I have supervised 17 doctorates, examined, getting on for 30. I think I've got my 30th examination later on this term in a couple of weeks' time. And I've done that alongside a system leader role. So it was a very part-time role. And then the system leader role has been a huge thing. These things kind of come along and take over your lives, don't they? And then that's kind of died back down again. So I am just at Liverpool now, and enjoying being a bit quieter and having a bit more time to do things like this. And then alongside that, I'm the current chair of BELMAS. And BELMAS is a learned society that produce management in education and education management and leadership. So all my kind of academic interests, I guess happily for a teacher leader in education, have been around education leadership.
Amazing. And we'll talk a bit at the end when we say how people can connect with your work. But for me, I think there's still some work to do for people to be aware of BELMAS and to know that there is this academic place we can go when we're thinking about leadership. We'll move on to that later. So we'll carry on. Yeah, I was going to say, tell us a bit more about, where did it all start? Teacher or?
Yeah, so 30 years this year, so 1995. So I came to Bristol. I was in Bristol. I was at Bristol Poly. I did politics and history, did social sciences, loved it at what became UE. While I was there. And then I went to the University of Kiel to do a PGCE in social sciences. So I trained as an 11 to 18 politics history teacher. Loved it, loved my PGCE, loved being at Kiel. So I was taught by Tim Brighouse, Michael Barber. They were all there. At that point in the 90s, everybody forgets this about the University of Kiel. Everybody was like, why are you leaving Bristol? Because as you know, Chris, Bristol's a great place to be, right? Why are you leaving Bristol to go to a village in the middle of Staffordshire? But it was effectively the kind of outpost of the Institute of Education. And my mum had trained to teach in London, and she was like, I don't want to go and teach in London, because I think I would have loved teaching in London, actually, but I didn't go and teach in London. So I went to Kiel, and they had lots of visiting staff from the IOE. So the Institute of Education staff often were at Kiel. So we used to have guest lectures all the time. And it was just terrific. Loved it. Loved the course. Loved teaching practice. Knew I wanted to teach. But actually the lectures and the input we had that year made me think, I want to do more than that. So I got a post straight away in an 11 to 18 school, but I got a maternity cover post because my dad said to me, he's an engineer, and I think he was a bit terrified of me and mum just talking about education in front of him all the time. He was like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get a job straight away. Why don't you get a job just for a year and just do it for a year and see how you feel, and you can do a master's. So I got a maternity cover post, which was quite unusual then. Temporary contracts are, around all the time these days, but that was quite unusual. And I used that year. I was a sixth form tutor. It was brilliant. I was like 2.5 years older than some of the people in my upper sixth class. It was great because I'm an August baby, right? And I hadn't had any gap years or anything. So I think I was 22 and I had a 19.5-year-old resitting his A-levels in my tutor group. So it was all very kind of tight age range. And then I used that year to do some applications because the staff were really encouraging of, no, do it, go and do a master's, because otherwise we're still here 35 years later, you've got to do it. Sure. So it was a great staff team to be with. And I applied for a couple of places, that I didn't think I'd get into. So I had an
Mm.
interview at Oxford, and that was for an MPhil that would have lasted for 2 whole years. So it would have knocked me out for 3 years of teaching. And I really liked the
Yeah.
teaching, so I didn't want to do that. And I got a place at LSE.
Wow. Okay. Oh, really? Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Wow. Yeah. Wow. I love that. Wow. That is a great intro. And like I said, I had no idea of all that stuff, but it doesn't surprise me that you were involved in such pivotal stuff along your career. Um, Brilliant. Well, let's get started on knowing a bit more about you then. So, for those that are new to the podcast, we have a sort of series of set elements that make up the podcast, and the guests get to choose these ahead of time. And the first thing that we talk about is something called a fast friends question. And these are aimed, as the name suggests, to create connection between people as quickly as possible. And so they delve into some sort of vulnerable questions and they get increasingly vulnerable as they go through. And so the first one's pretty straightforward. And Deb's chosen, if she could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be? So tell us a bit about that. Okay. Bring him along. Right. Yeah. Right. For 8 years. Yeah. 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 Easy. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. There's a couple of it would, yeah, it is interesting now, absolutely. There's a couple of things in there which I think are fascinating. I mean, the one that, a lot of the, for people takeaways really as they go through this podcast, but one being, yeah, to kind of recognize the specialness of moments while you're in the moment if you can, because it's it must be hard for people, and this is, Obama, but other leaders who have, in their minds and in lots of people's minds, done really great things, and then to still be around to watch them unravel must be, well, disappointing and painful and all those sorts of things. Okay. Yeah, we had him on. Yeah, we did. Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah. That's so funny. That makes me laugh. Before he admitted he was a drug taker, I was obsessed with Lance Armstrong, and this is about 15 years ago. And I remember going to an event, and the vice president of Dell was on my table, and he chit chat, and he said that he lived in Austin, Texas, and I said, "Oh, Lance Armstrong lives in Austin," and he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, me and Lance are quite good friends. We regularly go out cycling together." And one of my thoughts was, if I accidentally brush up against you, if I've touched you and you've touched Lance, am I one? Am I, that's the one, yeah. So, okay. Well, let's move on to the second bit then. So another element of the Launchpad for those that are new to the podcast is that we ask the guests to reflect on what we call ignition points. So these are things that have happened in their lives, people they've met, events, sometimes, not great things that have happened to them that have transformed them in some way. And Deb's chosen the title I've got here is Relocation. So tell us a bit about what happened and how it transformed you. Right. Nice. Right. Wow. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. 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 Wow. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Nice. So, Right. Yeah. 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 Wow. Yeah. I love that. Wow. Great. Yeah. I mean, and again, I suppose transitions are a natural part of anyone's career, and certainly if you're, want to get into leadership, there are lots more steps above that you can take. So, and I guess yeah, managing those transitions is a key thing. And I think one of the things I talk a lot about when I talk about self-efficacy is this idea of a self-efficacy dip that, during transitions, there's a natural and kind of inevitable dip in confidence as you gain new roles or responsibilities and almost feel a step back from expert status. Did you feel that when you were moving? Yeah. Kind of family support. Yeah. 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 No. Yeah. Absolutely. Crazy. Oh my goodness. Yeah, yeah, it doesn't. It was a bit, yeah, but you made it through. That's good. All right. Well, let's move on to your first launchpad. Again, for those that are new, we ask guests to pick two infographics from the launchpad book, and we just explore what they are and why they resonate with them. So I'll just share my screen for those that are watching on video. And the first one that Deb has selected is titled "The Intricacies of Innovation." And like most of the launch pads, they're born out of my own personal ignorance, which is decreased because of the launch pad. So I was probably like lots of people, especially young leaders, in the headspace that all innovation is good, and innovation means doing something new and something the bigger the better. And they all tripped over this work by kind of Dublin in 2021 and talk about different types of innovation. And so they talk, in the literature, there's talk about this idea of kind of three main types of innovation. One being incremental. So this would be the opposite of what I thought, I guess. And this is sort of improvements to existing practices. So you're not creating something completely new, you're just almost innovating within something. And then the next one up, they talk about kind of disruptive innovation. And this one does create new kind of offerings. And this is not education based necessarily. So they talk about the phrase existing markets. So you're creating something new, but it's within an existing kind of area. And then the one that they put on the end of the continuum is radical, which I suppose is what I would have thought of in my early thinking. This completely new practice or completely new market, um, which was interesting to me, to be able to have a bit more of a nuanced understanding of innovation and to feel like just because you're not doing something really, really grand doesn't mean you're innovating, and little tweaks to things to make them better can still be classed as innovation. So then I started looking a bit more into it and sort of tripped over this idea of there are different things that you could innovate. And I suppose one of the hopes I have for the Launchpad is for people to take away this idea that, basically innovation doesn't need to be always massive, but also there's lots of different areas of your organization, business, team, self that you could kind of tweak. And so this first one talks about configuration. It talks about the idea that you could innovate in finding different ways to generate income. And I think that's an interesting one, certainly in education for head teachers, principals, leaders of organizations where money from external is not dependable or certainly kind of volatile, and that heads have to now think of innovative ways to generate income. There's the obvious one about networks, and I think lots of us have benefited massively from wider personal learning networks, and so you can innovate by expanding your network. I guess you can innovate within a team by changing roles. And then the final one was just kind of process. So innovating by looking at where a process or a system's not quite working very well and then finding superior ways to do it. So Dublin talks also about the offer that you're kind of giving out to the world. And I suppose it's slightly different in education, but he talks about the idea that you could create complementary products to the ones you've already got, or you could enhance the ones that you've already got. And I suppose the tie-in with education might be enhancing the curriculum maybe, or enhancing the professional development offer that you've got. And then the final category he talks about is experience. And this is more to do with customers, I suppose, or we would talk about students, we might talk about parents or other stakeholders. And you can innovate within your area by improving the levels of support that are on offer. I mean, if you're making it better, you are in effect kind of incrementally innovating. Something about communications, and I think sadly, the more I talk to people on the kind of front line about frustrations within leadership, a lot of it comes down to communication. And then when you ask people about the greatest leaders they've worked for, they talk about communication, which is interesting. The brand thing is not something you would naturally link with education, but I think it's probably become a bit more important. And people are actively building the brand of their school or their trust. And I guess the last one he talks about is engagement, in that you're deepening connections. And I suppose the obvious one for us is with parents. And we know, don't we, that largely the kind of stronger the connections we have with our stakeholders, parents in particular, the more benefits we can reap. And so that was what I kind of tripped over and thought about when I made it. But why did it resonate with you, Deb? Right. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. 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 Sure. Right. Yeah. 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 That's tricky. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. 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 Nice. Yeah. 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 That's- yeah. 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 Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. Of course not. No, no, no. Yeah, crazy. Isn't it? No, that's really interesting. Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, that's a great place to sort of stop really with that phrase that, and it rung true when you said it a bit earlier. This idea that, as leaders we need to be mindful that that our disruptive or radical kind of innovation doesn't become destructive um, over time. Fascinating. All right. Well, let's keep moving on because we've got a few more things to go through. So, the second fast friend question that Deb chose was, what have you dreamed of doing, but you haven't done it yet? What's that? Yeah, sure. Right, right. Yeah, 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 Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. A shame. It is. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. That's great, isn't it? And I think, yeah, well, something it resonates with me that you just said then was this idea that it requires a certain level of immersion and kind of depth of experience to really understand a system, because you've almost got to be there long enough for them to take down that kind of performative shield that they might be up. You know that idea of there's a launch pad. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, there's a launch pad in the new book which comes out December, called Speed Camera Moments, and it dawned on me. It came to me in the car because my son was basically saying, "Why do you slow down for the speed cameras and then speed back up again?" And I thought that's just how the world. That's like how everyone does, and it made me think about lesson observations and how, and I'm guilty of this more than anyone, that you turn it on, under observation or under pressure, you change your behaviors, you become more performative, and then when that spotlight's off you, you kind of regress back into what probably is norms. But that's interesting. Again, yeah, yes, yeah, 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 exactly, yeah, 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 yeah. Totally agree. Yeah, tricky, isn't it? Yeah, and again, I think time is always a nasty factor. And the other thing I thought about is, a takeaway for leaders. Leaders, a cautionary kind of takeaway for leaders who maybe visit a school for half a day and then come back wowed by what they saw, and then try to drag and drop it into their own settings. And this idea that, yeah, you have context, and you've got to be there. Okay, well, let's move on to your second ignition point, which is you've called closure, but we talked offline a little bit about there's a much deeper story behind it. So tell us a bit about why that's become a transformational element of your life. Sure. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, nothing we can do. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Just taken away. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just part of your career now. Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Sure. Keep going. Yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. Wow. No. God, that's so tricky, isn't it? Wow. And yeah, again, you know, the redundancy thing. When I started teaching, wasn't I'd never heard of that word really, and yet it's become increasingly kind of familiar, sadly, in education. And you have got heads, yeah, God, crazy. Yeah, 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 massive. Yeah, crazy. No, well, yeah, yeah. As we said, disruptive. Well, let's move on to your second launch pad. So again, this is something that Deb has selected because it resonates with her. I'll speak kind of through what it was when I made it, and then we'll ask her why it resonates. This one is fascinating to me because I do a lot of obviously leadership development, but I also speak to lots of kind of people on the ground about what makes a good leader, both in kind of 360 processes that we do, but also, in my mind, I want to develop my leadership programs to reflect what it is that makes a good leader, and so staff voice is really important. And the one that comes up probably most often is around communication. And so I started delving into this in a bit more detail. And of course, this idea that we cannot underestimate the complexity or importance of effective communication. And so therefore we could all probably do with having a closer look at how we actually do it. And so, like most of the launch pads, they try to be concise and to try to give people, as the name suggests, a launch pad into more thinking. I tripped over and then sadly got sucked into the alliteration of this. I got drawn into some kind of, characteristics of good communications. They started beginning with the letter C, and then I couldn't stop after that. So then I was actively looking for ones to do this. I was mindful at the time, but what has been since then, since creating this one, it's been a really useful, almost like temperature check for me when I look at the comms that I'm sending, via email or letter or whatever, as almost like a check sheet to see, have I meeting these? Where are the strengths? Where are the weaknesses? So I'll read them out for those that aren't watching. It talks about kind of as leaders, we need to check whether our language is clear. So are we using simple language and limiting jargon to, I guess, not layman, but people who may not understand the jargon? Is it concise? Have we reduced any redundancy in there? So it's just getting down to the core message. Is it concrete? So if we're making a point, have we kind of made it really succinctly, but also backed it up with evidence? There's something around, one of the words came up was confidential. I think that's fairly common. It probably lends itself more to verbal communication than written communication, but it is sadly quite easy to slip into gossiping or, loose lips sink ships, that sort of thing in staff rooms. And so then it talks about being careful with your communications. I guess I talked to someone recently about how, Stephen Covey would call it an emotional bank account, and Brene Brown would talk about kind of marbles in a jar. But if you communicate at a distance with people that you don't see very often, any errors that you make in that can land quite heavily, so you probably would never find out that the spelling mistake or the fact you got someone's name wrong has such a big impact, but it will do. It'll be a massive withdrawal from that account. So be careful, making sure it's correct, making sure it's current. If you're trying to persuade anybody or to lead some people to somewhere new, you have to make sure that the communication is compelling. And again, I think from the leaders I speak to, they are thirsty for some PD on effective presentations and this idea of public narratives to link to Obama. The other ones that came up on the thing were make sure it's complete. If you're going to send an email, make sure you don't have to send a second one later because you missed stuff out. It says customer focused, but again, I think audience focused is probably, a nicer one. Make sure you've checked it, and then obviously check that it's been understood. And so those were sort of like 12, I suppose, the 12 C's of communication. And then I started looking at this idea of, was there any other guidance? And what came up was this frustration from some people that email or, written communication sometimes lacks a personal touch. And so if we can, verbal should be our preferred communication style. And then when we do that, again, we have the opportunity to either build that relationship or to damage it by our levels of presence. One thing I'm not great at, which I need to, I've been thinking about this recently that I don't do very well, is I think about what I'm going to say to the person as I'm going up to speak to them, or if I've got time before I know I'm going to go and speak to someone. Usually it's people above me. I then launch into the talk almost in the middle of my thoughts. And so I've done a little thinking. They have no idea what I'm going to talk to them about. And yet I go straight into the kind of the depth, which I think raises their cognitive load. And it means that they then struggle to kind of keep up with it. And so that's definitely on my mind that I need to kind of, check that before I start doing it. we've talked a bit about the kind of permanence of written communication, and so we have to be super super clear and careful about that, so we don't get any kind of strange results. And then another thing which most of us, I would imagine, do unconsciously is our non-verbal communication, our body language, and you may not think that you're communicating non-verbally, but if you speak to the other person, it sometimes screams louder than what you say. So that was interesting to me. But why does the comm stuff resonate with you, Deb? Right. Nice. Yeah, yeah, nice. Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah, right, nice. Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. No. Yeah, of course they do. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course it is. Yeah. Yeah, of course. No. It's so funny. Oh my goodness. Yeah. No, what a waste of time. That's so, yeah, yeah. Right, right. Yeah, of course. Not as bad, yeah. That's so funny. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, perfect. And I think that's right. Again, the takeaway from me is this idea that, you know, we may have some driving principles around our comms, but we do actually have to kind of responsively alter those, towards our audience. Well, I'm conscious of your time, so let's get on to your last fast friends question. And this one is as it suggests more vulnerable than the ones before. And so this one says, if your house was burning down and your pets and family were safe, what one other thing would you save from the house? Yeah, gotta save them first. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Oh god. Wow. Nice. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. It is. No. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Wow. It does. Yeah. I love that. Amazing. Well, I'm sad to say, yeah. Well, I think we've probably come to the end now. What a fascinating journey through your career and life and all those things, and so many takeaways from me and for other people. Tell us a bit about how people can connect with you or the work of Belmas. Right. Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 No. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Amazing. Brilliant. And you've moved over to LinkedIn. And, no, but you've switched over. Yeah. Sorry, I meant you switched over to LinkedIn rather than Twitter. Yeah. No. Yeah. Brilliant. Perfect. Well, the only thing to say is to say thanks. So yeah, connect with Deb online if you're interested in that stuff, and then get in touch with me if you're interested in any of the Launchpad stuff. Yeah, thanks ever so much, and we'll see you at the next one.